All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of The Big Ben Show. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can follow me on X at bdomenech. Follow the show on X and Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in the media landscape as it relates to the Washington Post. The Washington Post is currently undergoing a series of firings based on the fact that they've lost readership, they've lost viewers, they've lost respect from those in the city, and they've really lost any kind of attention for local coverage that used to drive their popularity as a big-time newspaper. But one of the most interesting developments within this whole fracas over where you have, outside forces, condemning Jeff Bezos when before they were welcoming him with open arms when he decided to back a paper that was much in need of money and resources. They're going after him for getting rid of the Washington Post sports coverage, particularly a sports page that has long been vaunted and has featured the columns of many of the respected writers over the years who are still, in some cases, on your airwaves or contributing in different fashions, but have essentially retired or stepped away from the work. We're thinking, of course, of Tony Kornheiser, of Michael Wilbon, of Tom Boswell, of Sally Jenkins, and the like. The Washington Post sports section used to be one of the best sports sections in the country and actually was the starting point for a lot of people who gained national attention and are still on your airwaves or writing books still today. It's the type of thing that you could be proud of, but also something that was deeply unifying for a city that cared deeply about its sports teams. The Redskins, of course, more than ever, but also seeing the rise of the Washington Capitals as a hockey franchise and the return of baseball in the form of the Nationals as being something that really took over the attention of a lot of DC residents who, even if they used to be the type of people who would come and go with each administration, have a much more sticky nature now for a lot of different reasons. It's good to go from Capitol Hill to work for a consultant, after all, when it comes to your finances. But what we really saw was something that went from a unifying element of American of American sports media become something that was far more political in recent years. And we saw that happen gradually and then really all at once. It was pretty incredible when it happened. You saw these old voices that would focus and stick to sports in the framing of it, in the way that they talked about things, at least for the most part, really fade away. And a new group of writers, columnists, and reporters come in who were entirely interested in American politics and the politics of DC as opposed to the sports that they were supposed to be covering. It's incredible to see it in retrospect, where you had more coverage of Abby Wambach, Sean Doolittle, and people like that than you had for Joe Gibbs. You had an incredible investment in supporting the braveness of the U.S. women's soccer team and talking so much about Curt Schilling's problematic nature. One more column after another from Kevin Blackistone about either the Redskins team name or Colin Kaepernick. Just take your pick based on the day. Blackistone, by the way, is someone who has called for Israel to be permanently banned from the Olympics. He's still on major networks and ESPN. This is one of the things that really took over the sports conversation. And I think it is a part of a whole in terms of why we see the old guard of sports institutions flailing and failing to connect with the fans of today, but also becoming a divisive and often culturally out of touch institution as it relates to the players that they cover, to the people who pay attention and pay for tickets, and who actually want to read about the sports that they love. You see this particularly, as Ethan Strauss has written, within the NBA, where you saw players who really didn't have political opinions during the BLM movement and everything else that came after that, pushed by leftist journalists to take positions that they never really wanted to hold. You also saw that most recently in the aftermath of the Aussie Open, where he was trying to get players from America to bash Trump and was more interested in that than talking about anything related to tennis. That's the Washington Post sports page over the last 25 years. And you really see the difference. Nobody really cares about your coverage of the game last night. They care about the politics of a player involved in it and whether the team is going to apologize for what he liked on Instagram or something along those lines. This is a complete mediocrity of an institution. And it's something that has actually, I think, been worse for the community as a whole over the last several years than anything else that I've seen come out of the Washington Post. I still remember a piece that I read several years ago at the height of Alex Ovechkin's real success. He was at 800 goals and climbing, on his way to a historic season. And the major question the Washington Post sports section had about him was whether he was going to apologize for saying nice things about Vladimir Putin as a Russian because of the war in Ukraine. He became problematic, even as people were cheering him on, buying his jerseys, supporting the team, and overjoicing when they won a Stanley Cup. If you check in on some of the people who've moved away from the Washington Post sports page in this time, you'll see that they've kept things up. I looked at Sally Jenkins' feed. One of her most recent tweets is a picture of ICE representatives saying, if you dress like an invading army, people will treat you like one. One from Jason La Canfora, who was at the Washington Post and then CBS for many years covering the NFL, said that you can trace all the problems in the economy back to Reaganomics and the complete and utter bullshit of deregulation and trickle down. It's the grift that keeps on grifting. And then there's the great Mike Wise, one of the most mediocre talents that the Washington Post ever paid a ridiculous amount of money to, and writing that the one thing he'd like to say to Caroline Leavitt is that she's a disgrace to her job and to go to hell. This Washington White House press corps is gutless. They don't even stand up for one another. Some free press, no. That's the kind of people you had covering sports. What kind of surprise is it that that's the kind of coverage that you're going to get? What kind of surprise is it that that's the kind of coverage people don't want to read? And to me, this is an indication that one of the biggest stories that we've had and that we've perhaps ignored over the last several years is a certain moment. And that's when one of ESPN's best anchors, just categorically, I think he was, moved from ESPN, from SportsCenter to MSNBC in 1997.
Hi from New York on the all-new Monday Countdown podcast. Amazingly, they have confessed why Alex Pretti was murdered in Minneapolis on Saturday. They, the Trump terrorist organization, the Proud Ice Boys, the Border Patrol death squads, killed him. But just as importantly, the Attorney General of the United States, a moron, confessed on TV the real reason this happened. She was already writing, she said, an extortion letter when Alex Pretti was killed for brandishing a phone. Pam Bondi will end ICE's invasion of Minnesota. Trump will end it if Minnesota gives her Medicare data and the end to sanctuary cities there and its voter rolls. Easier to fix the elections if you have the voter rolls. But what they really wanted was, as Bondi incredibly said on Fox, quote, "We sent Governor Walz a very strong letter today. We got it out saying that he better support President Trump. That he better support President Trump. The Trump attack on America and on Americans is to threaten governors, threaten mayors, threaten you into compliance under penalty of death."
What you hear from Keith Olbermann today is obviously what he thinks. But before, he was telling you what he thought about the Yankees. Before, he was telling you that he thought that Mike Tyson biting off Evander Holyfield's ear was an indication that boxing was now living the story of the life of Vincent van Gogh. Before, he was giving you bon mots and jokes and wonderful asides while doing some of the best sports coverage in anchoring history. Instead, this is what he's giving you now, and it bears more than a little resemblance to Ben Affleck's greatest acting work of all time.
Seriously, Richard, why not preserve what tiny scraps of dignity you still have left and resign? Richard Wolff, McCain campaign buttboy, and today's worst person in the world. And now, as promised, a special comment. The letter was brief and to the point. "Dear Mr. Olbermann," it read, "the co-op board, having reviewed your request for an exception to its no pets policy in order to accommodate your cat, Miss Precious Perfect, regretfully concludes that in consideration of the rights of other co-op residents, such an exception is not possible at this time. Sincerely, Richard Lieberstein, co-op president. And there it was, all perfectly legal. Like the 1942 internment of more than 100,000 Japanese American citizens.
The sad part is, it's not just sports that has seen this happen. We've seen it happen all across the industry. And we've seen it happen most notably, I think, within an era of the same type of people, these same Gen Xers with strong opinions, who have occupied the realm of late night TV. I've talked about this before, but I think it's a real tragedy that no one younger than me really remembers a moment when Stephen Colbert was actually funny. Instead, this is the kind of thing that he's saying today.
It was written that you signed a $13.5 million deal with Netflix.
Not enough money.
Yeah. That you might run for office, maybe even president.
I've heard that one.
Yeah.
I've heard that one. Obviously, I mean, that's something I have discussed with my faith leader and my family.
Yeah.
And if there is some way for me to serve the American people in some way that could possibly be greater than a late night television show, I would consider that. But obviously, I've heard that, yeah. I get it. How about that? I get it.
Yeah. But FYI, they pay less than 13.5.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, that's true.
I know, it's pretty good.
It's a pretty good job right now.
Colbert coin?
Oh, my God, we'd love that.
The funny thing about that is Stephen Colbert actually ran for president already. He did it in 2007. He even paid the filing fee in his home state of South Carolina, trying to get on the ballot there. He made a whole shtick of it. It was very, very funny. I think I have some merch somewhere from his nascent campaign. But he did it, obviously, as a joke. That's what he is. He's a comedian. He's very entertaining when he wants to be. He had some great sketches when he was back on The Daily Show. The Colbert Report was an epic run, except now he takes himself too seriously. He thinks that he is the voice of some kind of morality. He thinks he is the voice of some type of American portion of the electorate that doesn't have enough voices speaking for it. And he needs to talk about his faith leader, about whether he has the guts to run for president or not, this time for real. There's a loss when we lose things like comedy. There's a loss when we lose things like great sports coverage. And that's something that makes everything more mediocre all around us. I'm Ben Domenech. You're listening to another edition of the Big Ben podcast. You can check us out on X and on Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. Please like, subscribe, share it with your friends if you like what you hear. We'll be back with more right after this. Happy to be joined on the Big Ben Show today by Bill Melugin. You can follow him on X at @BillMelugin_. Congratulations on being named the Congressional Correspondent for Fox News.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm sorry that you have to come to D.C., though, especially at this time of year. I want to talk to you, obviously, about what's been playing out in Minnesota and in the conversation around what ICE, Border Patrol, and DHS has been doing in the last several weeks. Are we at a real tipping point where Kristi Noem's job is in question?
Feels like we're at a crossroads. I can't say for certainty that she's at risk, but I'm hearing a whole lot of whispers within the department that she feels like she's at risk. And that's largely because of the fallout of what we saw this weekend, right? She and Greg Bavino went in front of the cameras and described Alex Pretti essentially as a domestic terrorist, that he was there to show up, massacre law enforcement, and that he showed up with a gun, and they made it sound like he was there to try to slaughter cops. Obviously, that wasn't the case. Now, there's been some reporting coming out that it was Stephen Miller who first said that, and Kristi Noem kind of feels like she's the scapegoat out of all this. We don't know. That's other reporting. What we do know is that there was a lot of blowback to this internally. I mean, my phone has never blown up like that before.
You said on X, you had a comment about this being viewed internally as a bad shoot, in contrast to a good shoot, which was the general reaction to the earlier incident with Renee Good.
Yeah, not a bad shoot in terms of malicious intent, just in terms of it was a bad shoot in terms of like the optics of it and what happened. So basically what I'm being told, the operating idea is that it was a hectic situation. This guy injected himself into it, and somebody yelled, he's got a gun, he's got a gun. That's when you see the agent in the gray jacket reach over and try to disarm him. He pulls the gun out of the holster, and the belief right now is that gun may have had an accidental discharge, which spooked the other Border Patrol agent.
Gun experts have online, who I follow and trust, have said that this is something that's potential with that model.
Yeah,
and that,
the SIG P320, because the Border Patrol agents use Glocks. So that's that's the theory that's being looked into. Is they hear gun, 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 then they hear an accidental discharge, that spooks them, and then they fire. So I don't know if there's going to be any sort of charges brought up. It's all still under investigation. DHS says they have multiple body cam videos, obviously, which they haven't released yet. But obviously, this has a different feel than the shooting of Renee Good, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The last week I had on Tricia McLaughlin, and I asked her directly about whether her office took it personally, what the president had to say about the lack of press, sort of good communication strategy when it comes to the things that they are doing. Is this a situation where, like, you have an immediate example of exactly what the president is referring to here?
Yeah, I mean, look, ICE and Border Patrol go out and do good work every day, right? They're going after criminals. And DHS tries to put out as many of those mugshots as they can, right? They're tweeting every day. They're putting press releases out every day. The problem is, you get isolated incidents like this, and the media and activists seize on it. It's all, think about, they said they ICE kidnapped that 5-year-old boy and was using him as bait. It's stories like that go viral on TikTok, on Instagram. I mean, and I can tell how it intrudes into that environment because people I went to high school with, went to college with, who have no idea about anything when it comes to immigration, are suddenly all posting that ICE kidnapped a 5-year-old boy and was using him as bait, right? So that's the sort of stuff that penetrates the ecosystem so fast, and it gets to a point where it doesn't matter what the truth is. The narrative is out there, right? It doesn't matter how many times ICE or DHS tweet about the child rapist they arrest or the murderer they arrest. Everybody just kind of expects that at this point. A few times a week, you get these isolated stories across the country where it's a pregnant mother or a little child or something like that. And that's what the media focuses on. And then once that goes onto all the different social media platforms, that narrative is out there. And it's almost impossible to keep up with it. I mean, if you're DHS, I don't know how you do.
Well, one of the things, and I, by the way, have the exact same experience as you. So many different people who I know who are disconnected politically, but who are obviously sharing these stories without sharing anything related to the number of people who've been sent out who were criminals, et cetera. I think that the White House is fighting essentially an impossible battle on this, that there's no real way for them to adjust it. And I speak to so many different people who are on Capitol Hill whose tone has changed on it. Has that been your experience in terms of the Republican members that you're covering basically backing away from an issue that has been at the core of President Trump's success from day one?
Yes, we're hearing some moderate Republicans start to internally call for Kristi Noem to either resign, be pushed out, or step down. Then you hear externally, Lisa Murkowski and Tom Tillis both put out statements yesterday essentially saying they think Kristi Noem is in over her head and they think she should leave the post. So yes, you are starting to see some cracks in that Republican foundation. Remember, when Trump got elected, there was this idea that there is a mandate for mass deportations because of everything that happened with the Biden border crisis, the millions that came across the border the last few years, that, all right, now it's time to get them out. Well, we knew this was going to happen, right, because of Trump's first term, that the media largely didn't have anything to say about immigration or the border for those 4 years. Now suddenly they've reignited their interest in immigration and they want to cover every little thing that ICE does. Okay, but you knew this was going to happen, right? Every little story that they can focus on, whether it's a child crying or a pregnant mother temporarily detained or something. ICE has arrested almost 700,000 people this year. And then when you look at the media stories that have gone super viral, we're talking, 10 to 15 out of 700,000?
The issue that you have covered here within the context of the border, both under the first Trump administration, the Biden term, et cetera, you're deeply familiar with all the nitty-gritty of it. What's the number one thing that when you see repeated on other networks or in major publications just drives you nuts because of how wrong it is?
The last 4 years, it was hearing that the border is closed or secure. Now it's that ICE has to have warrants. They seem to think people need judicial warrant. They don't. U.S. law, Immigration Nationality Act, you just need administrative warrants, probable cause, reasonable suspicion that somebody's in the U.S. illegally, that ICE is Gestapo's kicking in doors, going door to door, that ICE is raiding schools and churches and emergency rooms. My personal favorite, that ICE is deporting American citizens. Name one. Name one. I challenge anybody to name one.
Yeah.
Have U.S. citizens been arrested by ICE? Yes, because sometimes they impede law enforcement. Are all those arrests legit? No. Do some people spout off and record a little too much and ICE will temporarily detain them? Yeah, but an arrest isn't a deportation. If you listen to some of these Democrat House members and senators, they flat out say that ICE is deporting American citizens. I will challenge them. Name one U.S. citizen who's been deported. Just one.
Do you think that there's going to be a backlash against John Fetterman for the fact that he's kind of out there on a limb on this in his own party?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there already has been. I mean, there have been people within the Democratic Party who tell him to
it's one thing,
as a Republican,
one thing
right?
for him to break with foreign policy stuff or some of these other things, some pro-worker tax stuff, but this is the core issue, it seems.
Well, and that's where I think Fetterman has credibility with Republicans, but he did call out President Biden over his border crime. He just said a couple days ago that Biden did a terrible job handling the border. And now he's calling on Trump to get rid of Kristi Noem, essentially saying, do not make the same mistake President Biden did with his incompetent DHS secretary in Mayorkas. He never pushed him out. You should push Kristi Noem out. Now, do I think that's entirely fair to Kristi Noem? She wasn't on the ground supervising this operation, right? No, but she did put people in charge who were, like Greg Bovino. And I know Greg well. I did embeds with him with Border Patrol in California. He's a good guy. His tactics are just a little bit more aggressive, right? Like ICE goes out and they know everybody they're targeting. They have, when I do embeds with them, they have what they call baseball cards, like I-200s. It's their target, their nationality, their criminal history, their job, where they live. They know who they're going for, and they do intel, and they know when they're going to leave for work. When that light turns on in the bedroom window, they'll hear them on the radios. All right, 2 minutes out. Whereas I've been with Border Patrol with Bovino's guys, and we just get in the car and we pull up to a random Home Depot, and they get out and they chase anybody who starts running.
Yeah.
Right? You know, and sometimes you're arresting illegal immigrants, but those are the more risky operations where you arrest a fruit vendor who ends up being a U.S. citizen, and then the media goes crazy about it. And those are the stories that have penetrated, I think, to average everyday Americans more so than the criminals ICE arrest.
So if Kristi Noem, let's just say for the sake of argument that President Trump decides that it's time for her to go. The problem is whoever takes that job is basically signing up, if the midterms go the way that Democrats want them to go,
To be impeached.
to be impeached,
Yeah.
right off the bat.
Pretty much.
Forget all the arguments they had
Yes.
against you can't impeach Mayorkas, it's illegal, it's unconstitutional. All of that will be gone, and
Yeah.
they will impeach the person who is in that job.
Yes, you can pretty much 100% guarantee that will be the case. Regardless of who they are or how good of a job they do, everything that's happened up to that point will be placed upon the DHS secretary.
And so,
Yes.
so is that a reason for Tom Homan to not want that job?
I don't think he wants that job. As borders are, he already has such a wide umbrella, and now he's kind of the field general out there now, right? I mean, this is a big shift because Tom Homan had kind of been sidelined for the most part. Yeah, he'd do some media hits every now and then, but he wasn't on the ground overseeing things. And the rank and file really respect Tom. I mean, he started off in Border Patrol. He was acting ICE director. He's been there, done that in a bipartisan way. I mean, everyone's seen the picture of President Obama putting the medal around his neck. He has credibility amongst both parties. And I think you've kind of seen that with Tim Walz's rhetoric, right? How they've had these calls with Trump and with Homan. And you heard Tim Walz come out and say, like, yeah, Tom Homan and I don't see eye to eye, but he's law enforcement and he at least understands right from wrong. Whereas the language they use about Kristi Noem isn't as conciliatory.
Last question for you, Bill, and thank you so much for taking the time to join me. I know you have to go anchor and talk. The thing that is really sticking out to me about this situation is that it seems to me that if Republicans, not President Trump, but Republicans, do not get their position and messaging right on this issue, that the midterms are completely lost. I mean, you already have the historic trends. You already have the sort of signals that Democrats are going to do really well. They're going to take the House. They might be able to take the Senate. But I think you could see an actual sweep here if Republicans don't get this issue right. Do you think?
They have to, because right now Democrats are winning the PR war. These isolated stories, that's what's dominating the headlines. If I were ICE, I would be out there every day counter-programming that by holding up sheets of paper saying, this is this Ecuadorian national arrested for aggravated child rape who's sitting in the Hennepin County jail right now with an ICE detainer. Is there anyone in this room who thinks he shouldn't be handed over to us? Anybody?
Yeah.
That's the kind of way to because they don't honor detainers.
Yeah.
They flat out don't. And you hear these protesters out in the streets, and if you talk to them, they say, no, we don't want ICE detainers honored. But if you push a little further and say, okay, well, what about a guy arrested on 3 charges of aggravated child rape? Should they honor that one? Well, yeah, on that one they probably should. We don't want criminals. And that's the whole point. There's a disconnect, you know, and they gotta figure out how to get that messaging.
Yeah, I think it's fundamental. If they don't, then I think they're toast in the fall. You can follow Bill Melugin on X at Bill Melugin _, and he is a must follow on all of these issues and more. Thank you, Bill, for joining the Big Ben Show today.
Thanks, Ben. Good to see you.
I'm happy to welcome back to the Big Ben Show Winston Marshall. You can check out his Substack at winstonmarshall.co.uk and follow him on X at Mr. Win Marshall. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me again, Winston. I watched with much interest your take on your podcast about the situation related to Greenland and particularly the degree to which people have been ignoring the significant security matters that are related to Greenland that should be taken quite seriously, that are not the kind of thing to be dismissed as, fanciful land grabbing on the part of President Trump, but actually something that serves a purpose. Tell me why you think that message hasn't gotten through. Is it just the situation where anything that he does, people feel like they can just turn it into a joke as opposed to taking it seriously?
That message certainly has not got through. In the UK, polling suggests only 5% of the country support Americans, quote unquote, getting Greenland, as that was the verb I think the White House used. And even in America, it's not, it's driving the liberals mental, obviously. And across the continent here, you could see the reaction in the liberal elites where instead of, they took all those opportunities, not just to condemn Trump, but to pivot towards China. So Macron, the president of France, said he wanted to do more deals with China. Keir Starmer, as we speak now, has just landed in Beijing, trying to get more of a deal. And Mark Carney, as well, famously doing his big pivot towards authoritarian China, which actually goes against the very fundamental idea behind Greenland. And I also think, to answer your question more immediately before we go into looking into Greenland, it's been a bit of a failure of the Trump administration in explaining themselves. Now, to be fair to them, explaining China to certainly Britons and Europeans, but even the West, is quite a difficult one. When you see war zones, whether it's Gaza or Ukraine, it provokes emotion. But when you see the sort of slow, soft imperialism of China, even those of us who are paying attention, it's been difficult to sell it. Even when we have images of the Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps, I've struggled to persuade Muslims that this is a big problem. I remember going on Uyghur Uyghur solidarity marches in London, and at most there are 25 of us. You compare that to the hundreds of thousands of Muslims coming out to support the Gazans in London. Though that all aside, I think that the fundamental understanding of why Greenland is important has not been well explained. And I'm in a minority of Britons who think it would be good for the world if America have it. Now, I've got caveats, which I'd like to get to, but before, maybe we just get straight to the core, the nub of that issue as I see it, which is that America are the hegemony, and European security and prosperity is dependent on America being strong. And this, obviously, for Frenchmen and even some Englishmen is hard to stomach. I think a sort of deep anti-American sentiment. But if you look at NATO spending since 1980, and Scott Bessent said this, something like there's been $20 trillion more spent by the Americans than all other NATO countries and allies on individual budget spending. There has been 60% of NATO countries, allies spending on defense has been done by the United States. NATO is America, or rather, America is NATO. If America goes, the whole project goes. And I would say it's not just NATO that goes, it's the West that goes. So those of us who believe in Western civilization are dependent on a strong America. So that's one first principle I base my thinking on. And the other important first principle is that China and Russia are the threat to the West. Russia, it's slightly easier to make the case because they've been a traditional enemy for a long time. They have their nuclear arsenal, and obviously there's some division there, particularly since the Ukraine war, even on the right, about whether Russia are really the enemy. But even wherever you stand on Russia, they are degraded now because of the war, and probably not as much of a threat as I believe China are. And China have been playing a completely different type of war. It's not a hot kinetic war. It's a war on every other front. And for China, everything and anything is a weapon of war. And we saw this actually very recently with how they are doing practice operations with boats in the Pacific, and they're lining them up as blockades, as sort of the practice operations there. So you see them that we saw it with TikTok as obviously the social media platform, which is not allowed in China, but we saw through the Gaza war they prevented pro-Israel social media content from going out, and they deliberately allowed anti-Israel, pro-Hamas social media content to proliferate, and that has sown massive discord and division in the West. It's been a weapon of war for them. Now, the Chinese are quite explicit in using all these methods of as weapons of war. They wrote about it. There's a famous book called Unrestricted Warfare by two colonels of the People's Liberation Army in 1999, and they show how everything can be used for war. And then you have to look about what their ambitions are. Well, at the very least, their ambitions are for them to have more power, even if it's not sort of the destruction of the world. It's for maximum influence, which, by the way, every country wants the maximum influence they can have for their own interests. And then you've got to look at, well, what are the interests of China? Well, they are nominally communist, but they are literally fascist. And they want a maximum amount of power for their nation. So it's been difficult to persuade the significance of how dangerous China are. It's strange to me because, it was only 6 years ago that a man-made virus came out of a Wuhan lab, and whether or not it was deliberately leaked, the Chinese, and I should say the CCP kept domestic flights closed while international flights were open. Mm-hmm. The disease spread across the world. When anyone tried to speak up about it, let's say, for example, the Australians who asked for an inquiry into the COVID leak at the end of 2020, beginning of 21, the Chinese responded with sanctions. And if you want to talk about, here's another big thing that we'll come back to Greenland, but just to emphasize the point about China's power. Greenland there's a lot of the argument against it in defense of Greenland is for their own sovereignty. Greenland for the Greenlanders, they say. Well, just to talk about sovereignty with relation to China, in your country, when the basketball player Enes Kanter wore sneakers, he plays for the Celtics, or played for the Celtics, he wore sneakers with pro-Uyghur design on them. Yeah. He was taken off. He either didn't even get to start, or was taken off pretty quickly. I've forgotten the story exactly, and then was dropped from the club because the Chinese threatened that they wouldn't show either NBA or that club specifically in China China. In England, we had a similar, I don't know if they're soccer fans, but there's a player called Mesut Ozil, who is a Turkish Muslim, played for Arsenal. He also spoke out about the Uyghurs. And when he did, he was immediately benched and then sold as soon as they could get rid of him, because, again, they were threatened and told, if you don't shut up on this issue, you we're going to hurt you commercially. And it gets worse in Britain. Just this week, we've learned that Beijing have been spying on Downing Street. So not just on our government, but like the heart of our government, our prime minister. But also last year, we had 2 British citizens who were actually British people, who were parliamentarian aides, who were caught spying for the Chinese. And the case was dropped by Downing Street because they didn't want to affect a trade deal with China. So our own sovereignty in the West is completely challenged, because China will not do deals if there's anything negative about them. So they are a threat. They're just not a threat in the traditional way we understand a threat, let's say in a sort of the Nazis are invading type way, or the Japanese are going to hit Pearl Harbor. It's a different type of threat. And the threat, if we can go zoom out at one more time, is that the West depend for its survival. The West and the world, by the way, it depends on a strong America. And the threat to that is an insurgent China. And the New World Order, though some people think it's the sort of new era of the nations, ultimately will come down to those who are mightiest. And so that will be America versus China. And I, for one, for all the faults of America, would much prefer the American world order, Pax Americana, than Pax Shanghai. Now, I guess this is a long-winded way of getting back to Greenland and why that's important. Well, the Americans have made clear that for their security and hegemony, they need security and hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. Greenland is the direct route for Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles to get to DC. They pretty much all have to go over Greenland. And as for China, well, China have made clear their Arctic ambitions in their 2018 white paper, which is actually on the internet. You can read it in English. And in that paper, they outlined that they intend to be a governing force in the Arctic, even though they don't have any Arctic territory at the moment. And they also call themselves a near Arctic state. And so the defense of the West really starts in the Arctic. And I'll tell you why. I mean, there's lots of more we can talk about this and go in various tangents, but the significance here for Greenland is that even though they are part of they are sort of semi-autonomous part of the Danish realm, which is a NATO ally. So some might argue, oh, they have security anyway from for the Americans. If anyone attacks, the Americans, as an ally would be there. Well, there's a couple of problems with that argument. First and foremost is that the Chinese have a back door into Greenland. There was a story with them under the guise of investment, taking control of an airport there. They are trying to get in through commercial lines, and all of that creates a vulnerability point if there's American defense systems there. And that's quite key. And the other key issue, I think, is in the current situation, because Greenland are in the Danish realm and part of NATO, if America want to make quick decisions in a crisis, they have to get approval first from Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, and then from Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark, which completely defeats the point of being able to move quickly. And by the way, Europeans, they love to drag their feet. Yes. They're not quick-moving people. Americans are people who get shit done. You go, you move. The Europeans, for them, the process is the whole point. And by the way, to add to that, the process is the only way they're really even included. It's not just that they're addicted to process, but it's the only way they can feel like they have any power, because they don't.
It was very amusing to hear that honest objection to what President Trump pulled off in Venezuela. It was essentially, why didn't we have 80 meetings about this first? The reaction from Europe. So just to, obviously you dealt with a lot there, but to follow on that, the decisions that the European leaders are making in response to this have many American foreign policy old hands, who occupy kind of that neoliberal space and were essentially in charge until Trump's rise of American foreign policy post-Cold War. It has them worried that this is the end of the alliance, that this means that essentially we are going to go into a neutered NATO, non-NATO situation, and that we're going to see an expansion of nuclear umbrellas, that we are going to see, different nation states basically pursue programs that they had stopped or purposefully paused because of the alliance, and that this is essentially going to break American ties with Europe. How much of that is a real risk? How much of it is fear-mongering? And then, even if it isn't fear-mongering, is it still worth it from the interests of the United States and perhaps the world, even if it requires basically a NATO reset or a redefinition of what we expect from it?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, which I won't proffer an exact answer for, but I'll show you different sides of the argument. So to go against it, Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, has actually come out in support of American having more control in Greenland. And for all the reasons I pointed out, because he recognizes the threat of Russia and China. But what you're seeing, as well as the current Euro elites who are, like Macron and Starmer, even the populist right who are MAGA aligned, let's say, for example, Jordan Bardella in France, who could well be the next French president and is from Rassemblement National, even he had to distance himself from Trump. Even Nigel Farage, head of Reform UK, very likely to be the next prime minister in Britain, even he had to say, look, yes, America, the world will be safer if America have control in Greenland, but there has to be a decision from the Greenlanders. Now, for Farage, it's because his whole career has been about Brexit and sovereignty. That was essentially a sovereignty issue. So he has to be principled in that sense. But for the others, and for all of them, they look at Mark Carney and what happened when Trump said, we want to make Canada the 51st state. And even though the Conservatives were set to win the election, it completely switched. It ignited a sort of liberal, progressive nationalism. And so these actors have to be careful to they have to be aware of anti-Trump sentiment, even on the right, if they want to win upcoming elections that they might have. But as to your question about whether that affects the NATO alliance, it's still the case that Europe is on the back foot. I mean, Trump already got his NATO allies to up their spending to the previously agreed 2% of GDP, and now it's been stretched further to 5%. I forget by which timeline. I think it's 2030. Might be a bit later than that. It's still the case that when push comes to shove, these countries they need America. So they might talk a big game now, but when pressed into a corner, if you look at the military powers, I think they would still have to rely on America. I don't see how they could, which other forces militarily compete with America.
Mm-hmm. I think that one of the other things that is still unclear from the American perspective is how serious someone like Starmer really is when it comes to choosing the path that you gave a nod to. Is this going to fundamentally test that relationship, or is it just sort of a step in a direction, hedging bets, something along those lines? Is this a situation where, ultimately, within your and my lifetime, or even just a few years from now, we could see a situation where England, where the UK is closer in relationship with China than the US?
Well, at the moment under Starmer, they are definitely edging that way, which is why he wants the trade deal, even though it's a measly trade deal.
It seems quite minor. Could you go into that a little bit? Because that has never made sense to me.
It is completely minor. It's because they're desperate to have some sort of, they're in real economic trouble. Their budget's been a total mess for them since the beginning. They keep going back on their promises. They can't afford to cut any welfare, or rather, they can't afford politically to cut any welfare. They need any money that they can get, and so I think that's part of what the game they're playing. It's not entirely easy to read them, but it's also the case that the feeling towards China is not nearly as negative. And there's a whole line of thought in Britain, not just in Labour left-wing movements, but in right-wing movements. There's a group called the 48 Group Club, or it might be the 49 Group Club, and this is well documented in a book called Hidden Hand, and showing how really for the last 50 years Chinese influence has got into the political and got into Westminster and managed to persuade a lot of politicians that China is a friend and should be dealt with and should be traded with, and as a consequence we are increasingly tied to them. China owns a lot of British infrastructure. Even a country like Hungary, which of all the European countries, Viktor Orban has maybe one of the best relationships with Trump, but he's unbelievably tied to China. And these smaller countries sort of have to hedge for their own economy's sake. So it's hard to tell, but economically, I think all of these countries, we're all very tied with China.
I know that there has been a general sentiment here in American politics, and I would say that this is true actually on both sides. It's not just like the left is going gung ho for China, to take a lesson away from the COVID experience of building more things here, having fewer dependent lines to China. So even if the far left, the radicals and the progressives are essentially parroting CCP the mantras, especially coming from the mayor of New York, the truth is that if you ask working class Democrats, the few that remain, or middle class Democrats, do you think that we should remain as dependent on China as we have been? Most of them will tell you no, and those are the things that we see borne out. But there doesn't actually seem to be that type of bipartisan movement in any real way. It's become basically solely a monopartisan piece of policy. And I don't fully understand why that is. And I wonder if in the UK, if you're seeing something similar, if it's just sort of, look at Farage, he's anti-China for this, that, or the other racist reason or something along those lines. Are you seeing something similar, or are you seeing something different?
No, I'm seeing absolutely similar. And the great irony is that the right should be against them because they're communist,
yes,
nominally, and the left should be against them because they're fascist, literally.
Yes.
And if anything, this should unite everyone. I think part of the problem is that culturally China, despite the huge amount of Chinese Americans that there are in America, and there's a decent population here in Britain, it remains culturally a bit of a mystery. We don't know that much, and we don't have the influence of Chinese film in the same way that the American film is in Britain. It's a harder culture for us to fathom. We don't even really, the most people don't know Chinese history. So it's a bit, despite it being such a huge, great power and a great country through time, a failure of education means that I don't think as a people we know this. And, the question you ask is the mystery I've been trying to deal with as someone who's done a lot of advocacy for the Hong Kongers through the democracy movement from 2019. And again, through the Uyghurs, as I said, I've still failed to work out why this doesn't capture people's imagination quite in the same way that other international conflicts do. Like Greenland. Greenland seems to have made everyone have a geopolitical opinion. It's strange.
Back to the situation in the UK that you have obviously been covering and that I've talked to you about before as it relates to free speech, and you can spread this broader around Europe if you wish. The conversation about Greenland obviously took over the meeting at Davos and really redirected every conversation, it seemed, that was happening in front of us in a way that drowned out, I think, attention that would have been paid to the differences in terms of reactions to things going on in the free speech space. But one exception to that is this increased negative attitude toward X and Elon Musk that has primarily been taking on the form of criticizing what Grok does with AI images, of putting undressing people and things like that. How real is that as a significant possibility in terms of banning X in major parts of Europe or the UK?
In Britain, it's a real possibility. This blew up a couple of weeks ago. Some politicians were put in bikinis in AI images via Grok on Twitter. And this went against the Online Safety Act, technically, which had been brought in by Labour, but it was an act that started under the Tories in the name of protecting kids. But I note that the same outcry, and there was outrage really from the Labour front benches and Keir Starmer. You see, he's not a guy who shows his passion very much at all. Rarely ever have I seen him look like he cares about anything. But he seemed to really care about this issue and how disgraceful it was. Now, it's tied with, to be fair to them, the issue of underage children images, which should enrage everyone. But that was dealt with by Grok. And the issue from various government secretaries was the idea that government ministers were being undressed. Now, everyone looking at those images knows that they're AI. No one believes that that's actually real. And also, it can be done on Photoshop by anyone. It can be done on all the other AI platforms, but they focus on X, of course, because they hate X. They hate Elon Musk. For them, that is the enemy they're up against. So
can you tell me why specifically the UK, that England hates? I can tell that. Yeah, obviously, if you pay any attention to what they say, I can tell that. Why is that? Where does that come from? Why is the hatred toward him so much? And is it primarily because people who they dislike have used that platform to achieve great success and expanded their audience?
Exactly. It's the same reason that progressives in New York hate Trump and think he's laterally Hitler. It's Elon Musk is someone who has got the wrong politics from their point of view, and he's got power, and he has got crazy amount of power. And they've seen also through X how effective it's been as a platform to move the Overton window away from them. And we saw that. I mean, Ben, do you think Trump could have won in 2024 if Elon hadn't bought X?
No, I do not. I believe that was the most decisive element of that election. Broadly speaking, you can look at the situation with Biden as being a weird historical event, but just in terms of a choice that was made, yes. And look, I can say that's perhaps enough of a reason, but I can't think of a more anti-free speech perspective than basically saying, because people I don't like own a platform where other people that I don't like find an audience for their views, I would like to ban the entire platform. This is beyond setting up ludicrous guardrails or creating efforts to censor speech that we've seen happen through so many different NGOs, international NGOs that flowed into the American experience in such horrible ways. Like this is this is a neutron bomb.
Yes, absolutely. And they can, through this Online Safety Act, they legally can say, if you don't do what we say on this issue, we can fine you either, I forget the exact number, I think it's something in the range of $20 million on annual income, or I think it's 15% of global income, whatever's highest, which of course Elon Musk would never, don't quote me on the exact figures, but it's in that range. Elon Musk would never pay that, so they would actually close X down. So it was a real threat, which we'll see how it plays out. I mean, Grok did sort out the child issue, which is, it was good that they sorted that out quickly. That was a problem. But they also consider it a threat, seeing how effective it was, as you just said, Ben, in the States in Trump's last election. They recognize that it's a means for which the populist right, the insurgent right here, Nigel Farage, it's a great tool for them winning the next election.
Last question for you, Winston. It's always a pleasure to have you as a guest. I know that you are someone who pays great attention to media and to media developments in terms of the shifting nature of it, particularly in recent years. Here in America, we've had an absolute import of Britons in various media roles. I'm talking to you from Washington. The Washington Post is currently going through some spasms over their sports desk and other people who might be cut back. And a lot of fingers are being pointed, at some of the Britons who've come into the operation as being the culprits or were brought in by Jeff Bezos. We've also seen the expansion of new networks like GB News and others. What do you think about this importation? Is it something that's good? Are we getting your best? Are you sending us your best?
The Brits control all the media. Well, I think you're getting a mix of
there is a thing that happens where people who have flamed out, let's say, in one place decide to skip across the Atlantic and in one direction or another and make a new life. It's been
the question
going on for several hundred years. So
it isn't about the British. The question is, why is it that Americans take Brits so seriously? I thought that you'd learned to stop doing that back in the 18th century.
It's the damn accent.
Yeah, that's right.
So I actually do think that a part of this is that Britons seem more serious. That people have tired of very unserious blabbermouths in cable news and in newspapers and things like that, and that Britons come into the room and they just seem to take more seriously a lot of the issues that are going on. I certainly credit that to the success of Neil Ferguson and some other folks, who were kind of early at this. Anyway, I just think it's an interesting phenomenon.
It's an interesting phenomenon, but I actually put it on to the Americans because someone has said this to me yesterday. Is why are British people they're all so good at public speaking and talking? I'm like, I don't know that they are. I mean, maybe a handful of them are that you see, but I think, why is it America is so down on itself? You've got some of the best universities in the world, politically captured as they might be. You have the most talented, forward-thinking, the most incredible entrepreneurs. You're leading in every industry by one or two notable exceptions. But when it comes to space and tech and everything, it's the Americans who are leading the world. It's the Americans who are dragging us into the prosperous future. And I don't see why. I hear Americans, and I like yourself, and I think you're phenomenal. I guess America should stop being so down on themselves in this one department of the media.
Well, I think a good part of it is Britons are funnier in general.
I don't even know if that's true anymore. I
mean, maybe that's it. Maybe you're sending us the people who can't tell jokes in Britain anymore. That's a part of it. Winston Marshall, you can find more of his work at winstonmarshall.co.uk. Follow him on X at Mr. Win Marshall. Thank you so much.
And such a pleasure. I'm such a great fan of yours. You're really a great man and a great thinker. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much, Winston. Let's close out with something that's actually good within the world of sports, and I think that's this year's Super Bowl, which is ultimately going to be a real contest in terms of the differences in the types of teams that you're about to see. I think in particular, I want to highlight the story of one Sam Darnold, who has endured and stuck through it despite being considered a bust, discarded, just completely given up on by multiple franchises, and enduring the type of road to success that, you never really think is going to work out this way. The fact that you had, him go through what he did in New York, in Carolina, make the decision to go to San Francisco just to try to rework his game, have the success that he did in Minnesota, only to be cast off for the young J.J. McCarthy. Good luck with that, Minnesota. And end up in Seattle with, some people optimistic about him, but certainly not considering him at the top of the league. To make his way to a Super Bowl this year is really stunning. And it's also an indictment of so many of the decisions that other franchises have made. Over the years, we've seen so many different, well-hyped quarterbacks come out, not live up to the hype early on, get discarded, and have to essentially rebuild their career. Darnold may end up writing a script here that is more impressive than any of them in terms of his ability to make a comeback in the way that he has. And I think that we really need to appreciate how unique that is within this game. That doesn't wait very long for anyone to find that type of success. That doesn't mean I'll be rooting for him. I have a future on the Pats. You've been listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. Follow us on X and on Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. We'll be back with more next week to dive back into the fray.